Welcome to our first panel on growing food in our region. We have four lovely panelists who I'll be introducing in a moment. My name is Alyssa Rush. I'm a PhD student studying sustainable agriculture at Queen's, but I live in London, and I've been volunteering with the Middlesex London Food Policy Council for almost a year and really loving that. So we have four panelists today. We have Laura Ramirez, Mike Courey, Ben Wilcox, and Crispin Colvin. So I'm going to ask the panelists to just briefly introduce themselves and their organizations, and we'll start with Crispin.
Okay, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Anyway, I've been on a number of boards over the years, from Western Fanshawe College, which I chaired, as well as the London Training Centre. I was on it. And I'm currently on the Ontario Federation of Agriculture Board. I'm a graduate of both Western and Fanshawe. We moved to the farm in 1971 out in Thorndale. I wasn't a farm kid at all. My father was in the government service as a diplomat, so I lived in Paris, I lived in Ottawa, lived in Chicago, back to Ottawa before we moved to London in 1967 and the farm in 1971. Since that time, we've raised Highland cattle, which are the ones you see in postcards from Scotland. Don't have any anymore. And we had shorthorns and shorthorn crosses, so I was in beef. We also did corn, wheat, and soybeans. I have 2 adult children and 6 grandchildren as well as a border collie rescue who is now 15 years old and used to bring the cows in for me, but retired on his own volition. West Highland Terrier and a rescue cat as well. So I've been in the London area and on the farm since 1971, but as I say, I was not a farm kid. And when we first moved out to the farm, I thought, what on earth am I going to do here? Except the benefit was I got a vehicle to drive in and out to school all the time. So that was a bonus. That's me.
Hi, I'm Ben Wilcox. I was also not a farm kid. So I'm first generation farmer, and I've been doing it for about 4 years with Urban Roots London. I had no agricultural experience before working with Urban Roots, and with working with the last manager, I was able to learn operations and crop planning, and then we've been doing it since then. We're a not-for-profit organization operating in London, focusing on using underutilized urban spaces to grow organic food to distribute into the community equitably. We do that through our equitable distribution model, where we have 3 streams: donation, affordable rate, and market rate. Just to break that down a little bit more, we have many different donation partners throughout the city that access about 20% of the food that we grow. And then about 2/3 of our produce goes out through the affordable rate, and that's through our market stand at 21 Norland Ave, and several community resource center pop-up markets throughout the city that operate with our produce. And then we have about 10% that goes through the market rate, which is mostly our CSA box program and a few restaurant partners. But all 3 of those streams get access to the produce that we grow at the same time. Just to try to provide a little bit of dignity through food access to those in need. So yeah, that's what we do at Urban Roots.
Awesome. Hi, my name is Mike Courey, and I'm here on behalf of a farm we run called New Moon Community Homestead out in Elsa Craig. I also engage in academia and research and different types of community organizing. Depending on what day you meet me. Although these days, so over the past 4 years, we started the farm in 2020, and in a very amazing situation on a agricultural land trust, basically, that was started in 1991 by an organization called Rose Land Care Association. And at that time, Rose formed as a nonprofit, purchased farm in Elsa Craig, and has held it since in trust for future generations, protecting it for sustainable biodynamic agriculture, using it as a site for research and education, and promoting the social and therapeutic aspects of agriculture. So I work closely with the organization Rose, and my wife and I, along with a community of other folks, started New Moon Community Homestead as a social enterprise, basically bringing the mission of Rose into the agricultural operations. And so what we do in terms of agriculture is we do a variety of livestock, pork, chicken, and beef, as well as vegetables. And so there's that, team building and knowledge building around the farming side. And then we also do a variety of food processing things as well, from kind of, we're getting further into catering and really farm to fork kind of preparations, as well as we're also getting into butchering, so cutting and packaging of meats on the farm and preserving of the vegetables. So it's a big, wild ride, and we are a very young organization, but super fun and really nourishing to both our household. I'm married with 4 children, and so it's a great experience on that side of things, as well as the kind of relationships and community we get to spend time with. So that's who I am.
Iwanameta Deshnukasun, Tainoti Dakamyari, Michif Nandao. My English name, very boring, Laura. My pronouns are they, she. In my family, we like to joke anything but it is also completely fine. Give me 1 second to get my special friend here. I don't ever not travel with some specimens. I'll put it down for a second. I am a proud Indigenous farmer who farms on the Oneida First Nation. The brothers and sisters of the Oneida First Nation have welcomed me as a plant steward due to their really minimal capacity to do environmental work. So we have a beautiful 18-acre farm on the Oneida First Nation where we prioritize Indigenous crops, heirloom species, and diversified vegetables. So it may look a little bit unusual to some, may look like cattle corn, realistically to some. This is traditional white corn. This is Tuscarora white species. So not many of you know this, but we only eat 2 species of corn, peaches and cream and sweet, whereas there are actually like almost 200 different species of corn, 5 of which are in my bag right here. So I just like to advocate for the plants. One of my little nephews loves to call me the Lorax because I think realistically it makes a little bit of sense. And I am a radical force of change. I'm a connector and an activator and an advocate for the plants. So, yeah.
All right, thank you for those introductions. So we'll move into our first question. So the questions will all be on the slides for you to follow. So the first question for all the panelists is, what is something about growing food in our region that you wish the public better understood? So maybe we'll start at this side again.
Oh, okay. There's so many ways to answer that question, but I think the first thing would be where your food comes from. I don't think very many people have any idea of where their food comes from. It comes from a grocery store. If you go to large urban centers, particularly Toronto, or larger, like New York City, for example, people have absolutely no concept of where their food comes from. Also, the amount of work that goes into growing food, whether it's bringing milk to your table or whether it's beef, chicken, pork, poultry, vegetables, the amount of work that goes into it to bring the food to you. And I don't think people fully understand the high cost of production. The cost of producing food is high. So when we complain about high prices in the grocery store, I want to go back to 2000. This was a statistic I pulled up a couple of days ago. When grains for cereal cost 9 cents to put in a box of cereal. That's roughly a 12-ounce box, I think it is. It was 9 cents worth of ingredients and 5 cents worth of other things, 10 cents worth of packaging, but the cost was $3.39. The average corn yield, so you're looking at corn, grain corn, Kellogg's said that they could get 38 12-ounces boxes of corn flakes out of 1 bushel of corn. Corn yields in Ontario in 2024 were 200 to 204 bushels an acre on average. Some are getting more, some will get less. So it's important to put that into perspective. Now, not all corn goes into corn flakes, obviously. It goes into feed, it goes into a number of other products, including ethanol. But I also would like people to understand the high cost and investment for farming. Land in my area costs anywhere from $40,000 to $50,000 an acre. So you're looking at anywhere from $4 to $5 million to buy a farm. And that's before you look at the machinery end of it. If I want to buy a combine, new combines now are looking at anywhere from $1 million and up. And that's before you get the head to take the corn or the grain off. Yes, you can buy used equipment, but the point is, it's a very high-end industry to get into. And I think people have to also understand that we're a high business. We're a business like anything else. We're the same as whether it's, pick a business, doesn't matter. We are businesses. And we need to be looked upon that way. So when people drive out in the country and they see all these lovely farms and they see the cattle and the crops and that, it looks like an ideal parkland. And I've often said, yeah, I live on a park. I also cut the grass. But it takes a ton of work. For the cattle, I've always got to make sure I've got the fencing. I've got to make sure I've got water that's working all the time so they have a clean, fresh source of water. I've got to make sure I have feed, not just in the summer, but I have to plan to make sure that we have feed all year long so that I've got food for them. They need shelter. They need bedding. So it's really taking care of livestock is no different than taking care of your children. The only difference is the livestock tend to live outside, unless they're pigs or poultry, at which point they're in buildings. So I think it's important that people learn and know how food is grown, the investment that's involved, the risk that's involved. A few years ago, we had some people that were doing geocaching where they they go out and try and find a little vial and put their name on it. And we had people walking through our soybean field looking, now who on their right mind is going to stick a vial in the ground? Anyway, but the point is, my wife and I would go after them and say, get out of the field. Because if there's a bit of mold, for example, on the edge of the field, which can happen, you walk into the field and you're spreading it in further in. And the more you spread it, the lower my yield is and the lower I'm going to be able to have in terms of income. So we need to have an awareness of what agriculture is in terms of cost, in terms of the challenges to get the food onto the table. And the other thing that I always kind of chuckle at is people will say, oh, well, should I trust the food I'm getting? Short answer is yes. Canada has extremely high standards in terms of food and what our standards are and what we can put on a plate. But I also tell people that whatever is going on your plate, it's going on mine too. And I don't want to make myself sick with bad food. So be assured that Canadian farmers, Ontario farmers, are putting high quality products on your plate. We all do it differently. We've got some organic farmers here. That's great. I unfortunately can't afford to do that. I had a neighbor a few years ago who's since passed away. He was a dairy farmer. And he said to me one day, I would love to be organic. But he had 4 kids and he had farms to pay for. He said, I simply can't afford it. If everybody else did it, I'd be right there at the forefront. And that's the challenge in large agriculture, that we have to look at the bottom line. We have to produce as much as we can because we have to make money to survive. And what I'm putting on your plate, as I say, is also going on my plate.
It's really interesting to actually get that perspective from a larger scale grower, because this is what I'm going to talk about, is really prioritizing small scale agriculture. And also echoing what the MPP was saying, we actually have pretty good food sovereignty from what he's saying. 54% of all of the produce that's consumed in Ontario is grown here, according to those statistics. So that's actually much better than I thought it was. But we can grow a huge variety of crops in our region. And we have some of, if not the best conditions for greenhouse production in the country. My opinion is that if we get more people trained and able to operate small-scale, diversified, ecologically based farms, we can put a massive dent in our region's food insecurity and contribute to addressing the biodiversity crisis we're facing globally. By replacing an acre of corn with a diversified market garden, you can produce more than twice as much produce of 40 or more crops. So you're not only producing more food, but you're creating a system that is promoting biodiversity for the surrounding wildlife and improving soil health if you're doing it in a particular way. If you replace an acre of soy, you're looking at 8 or more times as much diverse vegetables while stewarding the soil, and hopefully contributing to a thriving ecosystem that surrounds and weaves through your farm. And by starting small, while still not insignificant, the barrier to entry into agriculture is a lot lower. And there's so many different innovative ways to establish an operation. Here on the panel, we've got 4 different ways of going about it. And even with under the umbrella of small scale agriculture, like we're doing it differently. So we've got the not-for-profit model in Urban Roots, which was established by a group of motivated volunteer board members who operated that on a volunteer basis since 2017, and they didn't get their first paid employee until 2020. And then the organization has grown from there, and now all of the staff are paid, and we have up to 8 seasonal employees to operate all the different sites, some of which are here. Thanks, guys. But you can go at it the entrepreneurial route, which is romantic and admirable, frankly, and I think that's a really hard go. But you can also approach agriculture in a grassroots way that engages more people to get the job done. And I would be remiss to say that, like, we're also a somewhat socialized enterprise in that we are not functioning purely on the merits of our own profit. We are subsidized by the city, by provincial and national grants to operate. But that's giving, over the course of our history, like literally tens of thousands of people are accessing food from a very small land base within the city. So yeah, I'm rambling a little bit now, but I'll pass it on.
All right, thank you. Yeah, no, I will add that interesting perspectives given. Perspectives given. We just had a note to hold our mic closer,
Okay.
everyone. All right, thank you for that. Yeah, like from 2 different angles. Like we've got on the from Crispin's experience in sort of field cropping and probably larger acreage. To very tight market gardening on small acreage and maximum yields in vegetables. And I'm kind of like right there kind of in the middle a little bit, like running like, you know, this really mid-sized situation, 115 tillable acres, mixing a variety of types of livestock, and then also running into the vegetables and food processing, holy jumping. And so we bring a good range of experience to the table. But I think one of the things, what I wanted to start with is this question of like, what would I like to see more in the public, better understanding in the public, was really that starting from it is kind of as part of a biodynamic philosophy on food, which is that food as medicine, like that the food that we create is obviously quite important for our own bodies. And there's a lot of research that's coming out these days around like the soil microbiome affecting our body's micro and biological production. And from even like you go one level up from the physical into the spiritual realm, and you ask, well, you know, the ways that we produce such a fundamental piece of what it is to be human, the ways that we relate to each other in that production system, how does that affect our actual communities, our urban life, our rural life, a whole wide range of things to be thinking about. And so food as medicine is really about those social relations as well as our physical relations. And you take that even further though, it's also medicine not just for humans, but it's also medicine then for the air and how the air reacts to what we're doing. Medicine for the water and for how the water changes its own composition. We see algae blooms in our Great Lakes and runoff problems and erosion and sediment issues, which there are a lot of good policies coming out right now to try to address those things. But that's very important that relation of food production and how our air and water is functioning. And then also medicine for the natural environment, the wildlife, fish, and land animals as well. So all those things is very, very important. And so food, so it brings me to the second point of like what's really important for public to understand is really the shrinking experience of growing food, the shrinking number of farmers. They say, I think, I didn't do my background research that well right before coming, but the number, close to something like 1% of the population is producing food for the 99% of the population. And so what happens in a world in which the vast majority of humans are disconnected from food production? What does that do to the farmers? Like, how can farmers fit into that world? Because farming and growing is largely a lifestyle. It's not a 9 to 5. It's not a, when am I off? What are these off days, non-days? It's like, what are the problems I gotta face? Have we settled all our problems? Okay, I can go for a swim to the beach finally, or something like that. And so if you create this very distant world of food production and urban life, then we end up with a very challenging policy context and understanding of both, what to do in a policy world, as well as is there the will within the public to move certain policy forward? And things from land access, like $50,000 an acre, 40,000. How would we expect ever to have a new farmer? That's an impossibility, you might say.
It's a challenge.
It's a huge challenge. And so there's a lot of issues that come up when food is so separate from everyday life. And so we had a discussion yesterday when trying to think about these questions. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean everybody should be like into growing food? And in one way it's like, well,
Yes.
okay. Isn't it? So the strong resounding yes, right? On the other hand, you're like, well, we live in such a wild world with so many things and so many important issues. So can everybody really be there? But like, really, if you a part of human development, even if you take out, okay, fine, everybody can't be a farmer, and everybody can't be spending 80% of their time growing their food. What you can have is that everybody has had in their human development an experience of growing food, an experience of that kind of process and procedure. And I think that might go a long way. And then I just wanted to end that with the importance, like again, in a world of such not diversity, so much difference across the world in different ways. And the difficulty of finding that root and community is that food also and food farming and growing provides a very good route for community development. Like the kinds of relationships that can build when you're toiling are actually special kinds of relationships. And so that, you can see that coming through. That could be in, the Ontario provincial curriculum to actually have experiential learning fairly deeply embedded in child development, so that's something that sticks for long term. And so those would be various things that are on my mind for public. How the public could know more about the food and food growing.
I think one of the biggest things that I would like the public to realize about farming is that it's not just the nicety of getting these produce in your fridge. It's, as we were mentioning, it's almost 2 months of 45-hour weeks in 40-degree weather, in pest control, in all of the different avenues to provide food for these people. And I feel like as farmers, we're very selfless and we put all of that into our plants, but there are very minimal structural things that protect us as farmers. I don't know about you guys, I don't have benefits. Like I said, there was 2 months straight where I was working 45-hour weeks with no benefits. My back was brutal by the end of it. And I think that that's also really, really challenging for us. We cannot safeguard ourselves in these situations a lot of times, even though other people, the family farmers are able to do that. They don't have to do the advocacy. They don't have to do the business planning. They don't have to do the social media and everything on top of that while also doing crop rotations. So if I can say one thing, it's more than supporting our farmers, it's befriending our farmers and understanding what their needs are as friends to better assist them in their path to feed us. I think that that's really, really important.
Thank you. So we'll move to our second question, which is, how can urban and rural growers, communities, and partners work better together to build a more resilient regional food system? And we're going to start with Ben this time.
My experience so far I'm not really like a policy guy, I'm more of a production person. But I do think it's really important to connect urban and rural growers. Sorry, I gotta hold the mic a little bit closer. But in my experience, there's way more people applying to work at a place like Urban Roots than Urban Roots as an organization can like sustain and train. And as far as urban operations grows and the role that they play in our food ecosystem, there's a limited land base in the city, and that's highly competitive and sought after land for addressing housing needs and everything, which we can talk about a little bit later in one of our next questions. But lots of people are interested in the city, and we need a better connection and like pipeline almost to get people trained urban, where they have access through public transportation and just proximity to these urban operations, to let them know what kind of opportunities there are rurally where the land base exists to work on different operations, perhaps slightly larger scale operations, and also to start your own farm or another duplication of another farm. And that obviously takes community support from both urban operations and rural operations. But yeah, I think that kind of pipeline from urban to rural and really cementing what opportunities are out there for people in agriculture is important. Actually, which way do we want to go here?
All right, yeah. So so how can urban and rural growers, communities, partners work better together? Well, I think as Crispin did point out at the beginning too, agriculture, growing food, extremely expensive, extremely risky. I call it farming is essentially, from a financial point of view, super high risk, super low reward. Like you're pretty much, that's the math on farming. But however, from a social point of view and a sort of life point of view, it's super high reward. So you got those tensions to work out. However, but it is true. So if we're going to grow a regional food system that actually feeds the people in our region, there's got to be a lot of connections made across types of growers, across community groups, across facilities, et cetera. And it's true, we're actually sitting in the beginning of what can help build regional food hubs, which is shared spaces for regional processing. Because part of the financial challenge of food growers is, in fact, where those margins come through. And the thought is that the margins on food, the farmer is a price getter. Generally, is getting prices from a market. And so those prices are preset, and you don't have much control on what's going on there. The middle, the processing, is often where the dollars are made, often where those margins are hitting. And so part of building a regional food system is bringing those dollars closer together, bringing those, so that I think there'll be vertical integration of food production, so that farms are actively involved also in the processing and capturing those dollars that are in the middle. And I'll just give you like an interesting counter position of what's going on there right now is in the beef industry. Like, so beef right now, so in the beef industry, you have three kind of tiers. You've got your cow-calf producer, so you got someone raising females who's putting out calves. Usually those calves are then weaned off their mother at like 9 months or 8 months and sold to a feedlot. The feedlot then grows them into full size, and they sell to a producer. And so traditionally, or the last like 30 years, in Ontario, a variety of places, people have gotten out of cow-calf operations. They've gotten out of growing mothers to make babies because the prices they were getting for those babies wasn't even paying for their farm. And so we've had this massive reduction to a degree in calf producers. That's led into this, and so who was normally getting the dollars on the beef were processors. The guys slaughtering, packaging, retailing. That's where the dollars were sitting. And so like in America right now, you're seeing that who's upset about the new Argentina beef coming in is going to be the cow-calf producers because they're finally getting a fair price on their calves, and who wants it to happen are going to be the processors, the folks who want more cheap beef into their processing facility. So what I'm saying, bringing those things together, processing and growing together, I think is a critical piece of building a regional food economy. And there's tons of organizations who are working on doing that. So thank you.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that, because as we're talking about this, I'm thinking of the different organizations that capture all of these really key things, the growing, the processing, like Food Not Bombs or whatever. But I think something needs to happen, that all of those organizations need to come together. And, you know, whether that's this space, you know, utilizing the kitchen for your processing, or other types of opportunities, community-based opportunities. I think one of you guys mentioned the, you know, community, I guess, just a hub, and what that would really look like. And I don't think that there is a hub right now. There's so many fractions of this problem, and I think that it really comes down to a centralized location like this, where farmers can bring their surplus, and we can also process that and supply it to those that need it. I think that if you boil it down to that, it makes a lot more sense. But when all of the potatoes are in different pots, your food's not going to get cooked, right? So I think that it's really about bringing all of those key items together in one central location, whether that's a community center or the Grove. You know, I think it's really about bringing everybody together, locality-wise.
So people have touched on processing, so I'm going to start there to begin with. OFA has lobbied heavily to get more processing in Ontario. We need to process our own vegetables, we need to process our own beef, we need to process our own pork and poultry. A lot of our pork and beef ends up down in the United States for processing because we don't have the capacity. Two challenges with processing. One, we don't have labor. And two is we don't have skilled labor. So it makes it very difficult to get into that. Not that we don't want to do it, we'd love to see it happen. But the question was about building a more resilient food system. Part of what makes a resilient food system is also the ability to change. And we've changed in Ontario. We meet the cultural demands and the demographics of our communities now. So when we first went out to the farm in 1971, I mean, it was a meat and potato type of diet, and I was just fine with that. Since that time, for example, my brother is married to an East Indian woman, and their food is completely different than what mine is. A lot of it I can't eat because I'm not used to that level of spice. But the point is, we have developed our food system to expand way beyond what it was when I first went to the farm in 1971. In fact, Ontario grows over 200 different commodities in terms of food, fiber, and fuel. Just part of that's due to immigration, and that's a good thing. It really has changed and improved our diets, I think. But one of the things we never used to grow was bok choy. Now we grow that, and it's available in a lot of different grocery stores. We have more spices in our food than we used to, more availability, and that's part of the resilience as well. But that also relies on a supply chain, and that is another challenge in itself. The United States, for example, is proposing that trucks coming into the US, the drivers have to have a state or an American driver's license. If that's going to happen, that's going to stop a lot of Canadian and Ontario products from going across the border, because not all truck drivers excuse me, will be able to get that level of driving certificate. So that changes the resilience of the food system as well. One of the other things is that science allows us to be versatile and resilient. So it used to be at one time, soybeans, if you grew soybeans and you got sort of 25 to 35 bushels an acre, you were doing really well. That was a pretty good crop. Nowadays, people are getting 55 to 75 bushels. So varieties have changed. Resistance to pest has changed. Science has done that. All of that helps to get higher yields. And all of that makes a more resilient food system. So the challenge then becomes, how do you get all this bounty that we grow in southern Ontario to all those who need it? And that's where you get into transportation and the food chain. So processing is part of the puzzle to make it a more resilient food chain. Labor is part of the puzzle. And just as a statistic, less than 5% of Ontario can grow food. Less than 5% of our land in Ontario is arable. So when people say, oh, and I've had politicians tell me this, you can grow food, go further north. Well, yeah, they're opening up land around North Bay and Earlton, and it's heavy clay land, so it's a whole different type of farming, requires a lot of drainage. But the other aspect of it is, you can't grow the same number of tomatoes. You're not going to grow enough tomatoes in that climate because they just won't survive to meet the demands that we have. So we have to be more conscious of how we use our land in order to be resilient. And I've met with a number of politicians from the City of London, Middlesex, and throughout Ontario for that matter, to try and get that message through. We need to preserve our agricultural land. And that message is not getting through, in my opinion, but we keep poking away at it.
So we'll move to our next question. I think we're going to skip question 3 and move on to question 4 because we are on a schedule and we have 10 minutes left and then we'll move to questions. So the next question is, how should land stewardship and policy evolve to support the future of growing food in our region? And then to follow that, what approaches or knowledge should guide us going forward? So this one we're going to start with Laura.
Elder Mary Ann was mentioning in her intro the importance of treaty, and I think that it's really important for us to remember that we've made a treaty with these plants. We've made an agreement with this land. And for me, my treaty is as follows: protozoa, plants, people. And I think if we focus our policy, our community development, and our funds into that treaty, it kind of takes care of all of the things that we're working towards. The soil health, land justice and acquisition, plants, I think diversifying with the science and seeing what cool developments we can make, diversifying with heirloom crops, bringing back some traditional items that do really, really well in these biomes. And lastly, the people, of course, not lastly, but I think that the land needs to be centered first. That's why I mentioned the protozoa, because we have really failed those relatives. We have really failed our soil relatives. And it's funny that you mentioned the development, because if I see one more of those Ring of Fire development commercials, I think I'm gonna scream. Because as a grassroots farmer, seeing the efforts put forward by those governments for things that are not agriculture, it's really upsetting, right? And I think about all of the multi-billion dollars that they could then put into First Nations agriculture. Like, yeah, I understand the importance of you know, economic development and mining and, you know, jobs and minerals to make the X-ray machines. But I think that if we focused on the soil health and the health of our people, we wouldn't need the X-ray machines because our people would be better. And just really bringing that back. So if you can get it tatted on you guys if you want, protozoa, plants, and people. Just keep repeating that to yourselves when times get challenging. Farmers, keep repeating that to yourselves. We have goals, and you know we got to work for really important things, but always remember that.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so focusing on the soil and policy around soil. So you know, so at the beginning I said the organization that holds the farmland and buildings that we work for is called Rose Land Care Association, which Rose is actually an acronym for regenerating our soil economically. And fascinating, like 1990s that organization was founded, thinking about land ownership in a totally different way, saying they did their campaign raising money for that, to buy that farm, saying that land, this is pretty far, land should not be owned. Particularly farmland, it should be held, it should be stewarded, it should be cared. And right now, what's going on for farmers is that if you're gonna be a farmer on some significant acreage, the chances are your retirement is not actually from your farming. Mm-hmm. Farming is just what you do for your daily work, holding that land. And your retirement is actually from selling that land. That's what your retirement is. You are a real estate holder, and that's what you're going to do to get out. So in our situation, we live on a land trust, owned, held, we'll call it. We don't like to use the word owned hardly. We like to use the word held by a nonprofit, protecting it for future generations and soil health, and but we find ourselves in a bind. What's going to happen to my family in 25 years? What we can just maybe make it work to make enough money to like pay some bills. Where's your retirement? Where's that old age care going to come in? And so there's but you know what? This opens up a world of possibilities. You have to get really creative. What does that mean? What's holding land, stewarding land, growing food, not treating land as a commodity that's going to be flipped over for 50 grand an acre. That's a whole different way to think about our food system, and does require some significant policy. And so I'll say, I think now just brief, three areas that we could really use this kind of policy on. One is policy that incentivizes new ecological farmers. So farming that's largely focused on how can food production be integrated with nature and the environment, and focused on soil health, basically. So that's fun. So if you had policy who's holding farms, helping organizations holding farms or holding land in this way, then the policies are essentially contractually obligating the farmer to follow certain types of ecological methods, protecting land in those regions. And so there's something to that to be looked at. Second, I do believe that the new generation of farmers, or at least it is a farmers who want some kind of community, who don't want to necessarily go fully into like our grandfathers' forms of toiling, where and so these farms of the future probably need different types of infrastructure capacities around housing and housing policy in the rural areas, and that is also kind of being developed in some spots. And then finally, how can you get these farms started? And so it comes down to these kinds of supply chains. And I think we actually have people come. We have a speaker that's coming on behalf of a group called Nourish Health, and buy local food policy. So utilizing the institutions that are buying massive amounts of food and connecting those purchasing or supply chains directly to certain types of farming operations. And that takes a long time to do, but I think there's actually real work getting done in that area. Hospitals, universities, municipalities spend millions and millions of dollars on food procurement, and it's a fairly concrete policy area that can really build your regional food system.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm definitely going to echo the prioritization of focusing on soil health. That's what our future as a species depends on. So farming in an ecological way that improves, not degrades the health of your soil over time is critical. Huge piece of that is education. I'm definitely going to be coming at this from the urban farmer perspective. We have a great interest and capacity in our youth who are wanting to learn how to farm and contribute to hopefully solving our climate change crisis, but also provide food for their communities. So one of the main challenges that we face, even in small-scale agriculture, is the puzzle of putting the labor together to accomplish all of our goals, especially on the ecological front, in that most of our labor is through Canada summer jobs, which as a not-for-profit, we're able to be subsidized up to the minimum wage for any given employee. But for-profit organizations can also access Canada summer jobs as a subsidy. They just get 50% of minimum wage. But there's very little flexibility in the time windows in which those employees can be hired. It's basically it's geared towards students. So April until the start of September, which if you've grown food before, there's a lot going on in April and September and October, and that's when you don't have any labor to accomplish those goals. And especially in the fall, that's when you're harvesting the most of the whole year, and you're also transitioning to winter growing, but you're also doing things like sowing cover crops, which is a huge ecological practice, which frankly, we've struggled with accomplishing those goals, which are worked into our plan. We just simply struggle with the labor to get all of our operational duties accomplished while prioritizing those ecological tasks. So I think policy that adds a little bit more flexibility to those subsidized wage programs would be really great. But we've got 1 minute left. Let's pass it on to Crispin.
Thanks. Quickly, farmers are good stewards of the land. I want you all to know that. We take care of the land. It's important that we do. And in terms of soil studies, the Senate of Canada under Senator Rob Black have done a soil study on land and what we need to do. I won't get into it, but anyway. One of the other things I want to point out is we owe our existence to 6 inches of topsoil and the fact that it rains. Without that, we're in a heap of trouble because it takes 500 to 1,000 years for 1 inch of topsoil to be developed. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization estimates that by 2050, 10% of the world's land mass will be arable. That's it. 10% of our land mass in the world will be able to support food. Of that 10%, 7% is grassland and cannot grow crops. So that means we've got 3% of our land mass in the world that's going to feed close to 10 billion people. So we need to take care and be better stewards of our land, not just from an agricultural point of view, but from an urban point of view. Ernie Hardeman is always quick to say the best land in Canada is under Toronto, and he's right. And so we have to change our mindset as to where we grow our cities and how we grow our cities. So we need to start looking at having our politicians at Queen's Park and in Ottawa designate the country the same way you would as a city, the same way as Schuyler probably does when they're looking at industrial, commercial, residential, recreational areas. We have to start saying, okay, this is a great area to develop for industries because it's not going to support food production. This is a food production area, so we don't want to put a lot of businesses there. Now, at the flip side of it is, if the mayor of London came to me and said, we want to build a processing plant for vegetables here, and this is pretty high land, I'm going to say yes, because we need that. So there is a trade-off on it. So we have to start looking at how we treat our land, where we grow things, not just food, but our businesses, our housing, our industries. We have to look at this as a whole picture, not simply as only farming or only the city. We have to look at the entire concept of how to build our communities. And the last thing I want to mention is stewardship means taking care of the land for the next generation. So the farm I have is not my farm, it's my son's farm. It'll be my grandson's farm. It'll be my great-grandson or granddaughter's farm. It could be anybody else. But the point is, I'm not going to, for want of a better term, rape the soil for profit, because that does no good, not for me, not for the next generation, not for the future. So one of the most important things we have to think about, we need 3 things to survive, I guess 4: food, shelter, clothing, and water. If we didn't have shelter and we didn't have clothing, but we still had food and water, we'd survive. Might be a little chilly, but we'd survive. But the point is, without food, without water, we're in a lot of trouble. And so it's really important to press our politicians, to press the decision makers to realize that agricultural land, it's a finite resource, and we have to protect it as much as we possibly can. That means things like in the City of London, grow up, not out. We've been advocating that for years to have cities, and even places like Strathroy. I'm talking to the mayor there, and build 3 or 4 story walk-ups. Don't build housing that spreads out. You look at Ilderton, they're covering some of the best land in Ontario. Same with Lucan, and I think they're great communities. But it's not doing any favors to the future generations who want to eat.
All right, so we have around 10 minutes for questions. So there should be a slide with a QR code. Go and pass that slide, next one. All right, so we have a QR code. You can scan that, or you can just raise your hand and someone will bring you a mic. If you have a question for our panelists, does anyone have a question?
So we heard about the financial struggle that you go through, and it brought up a curiosity for me. If policy shifted and people ate locally and all these great things happened and money wasn't a barrier, what would your life look like? What do you dream of doing on your farm?
Okay, you go first.
Okay, what I would dream of doing on my farm, if I had the labor and the support to do it, I would love to diversify into more crops, perhaps some vegetable crops that I could sell, but unfortunately I don't have the labor, so I have to stick to what I do best, which is large-scale agriculture. Ideally, I would love to diversify, have a few more things. One of the things I've seen in terms of diversification has been things like flowers. I'm not a flower grower, but I know people who are, and they enjoy it, and they do well with it. So diversification, if I could wave a magic wand, assuming that finances were not an issue. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. If finances weren't a barrier, I would really dive more deeply into how we can reduce our use of plastics. That's a huge priority for me in theory, but with all of the weed pressure we experience, our limiting growing season, so using things like greenhouses, if you're using a plastic greenhouse, it's recommended that you change that plastic every 4 years. We don't, but you start to get yield reductions as the plastic lets in less light. But if money was not a barrier, we could explore opportunities to not use greenhouses at all. Just really reducing our impact and really trying to increase the diversity through installing things like hedgerows to really increase the biodiversity on the farm as well. But that takes, resources and lots of labor.
All right, yeah. If money wasn't a barrier, well, first off, I'd probably try to work more like 6 days a week rather than 7. No. I'd go to the beach a bit more, it's true. But
It's the second time you've mentioned the beach.
I know. Well, there's a lot of dreams of the beach in the summer. No. I guess I would execute our dream, which would be to build a food handling facility and event space on the farm, and bring more and more growers together through various types of programs, build it out as an amazingly coordinated, cooperative farm where there's shared ownership across the farm. Those kinds of things would be where I'd love to go if it was that straightforward.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that, because I almost imagine it exactly like a homestead. With anybody that needs a house, you got a house. Anybody that needs food, you got food. Anybody that needs work, you got work. And having all of those individuals, like-minded individuals on that property, you'd create a very solid community of care, I think. And then, if everybody did that, there would be communities of care everywhere. And then we would all coalesce together, and then everything would make sense. You asked for a perfect world, so that's what you're getting. And I think realistically, like I've said before, that would really meet all of the needs of the community. I think, we think a lot about work. I think about childcare a lot too, because on my farm, that would be an essential. I can't do my job if my cousins or whoever needs to be cared for. And I think that it's even more so when their tummies are empty, right? I think that when you can bring it back to that home unit, you bring it back to that community unit, it's so much easier to make sure that everybody is cared for. So of course, having a 4-story unit building, that's a nice community. Maybe they all share a kitchenette. Maybe they all share produce. Maybe they get an odd food box for the whole building, and doing it in a community-oriented way. So, yeah.
All right, so we've had a few people scan the QR code and submit questions. So I'm just gonna read one. What's our time at?
6 minutes.
Okay, 6 minutes. So maybe one more question. So there was one question: how can individual Londoners support your work? So what can people do if they're looking to support the work that you're doing?
A lot of people ask me about allyship and what that looks like, and I'm going to reiterate what I said previously. Be my friend. Understand my needs as a human, and understand my needs as a farmer, and then we'll get chatting. And you bring your gifts to the table. Maybe that's a personal monetary donation. Or maybe that's your time. Maybe that's volunteer time. Maybe you are a stellar accountant and we need hands on our books for the season. Maybe you have other really valuable skills that you can bring to the community in very different ways. Maybe that's just monetary, and that's totally cool. I think that it's really challenging for us to reach out and say, hey, we need a hand as farmers. So when other individuals, now that you're aware of the considerations that we deal with as farmers, onus is on you guys to help us out, to buy local. I'm not joking, onus is on you guys to do these things to change the community. We already do that in our own scopes. We already do the farming. So the onus is on you to activate this knowledge. Like I said, whether that's monetary donations to either 4 of us, whether that's even just going on our websites and checking out the resources and the developments that we update all the time. It's about stepping out of your comfort zone to help someone who is always out of their comfort zone.
So from a farm like ours, I guess like the most basic individual thing that can be done is just buying our products, keeping up with us, and then also, of course, being like gentle about, everything we do isn't perfect, so we just continue trying. So that kind of good relationship, just straight up customer and farmer relations, always amazing. And then we do have amazing people coming to the farm in that way. Money can be a barrier for everyone too. So what's the other spot? Like, honestly, helping out, volunteering on the farm. We have such a different point. We always call them angels in the season that come by, and they just show up. They just show up, and we have a problem, and somehow it gets solved by this magical person who came out of nowhere. And they are amazing. But so bringing those kind of gifts into the farming community, I think every farm would be happy to see it. And then from an organizational point of view, and more specifically for us, we are on the lookout. We do want to seriously build a food handling facility in the rural region that both serves our farm, but also brings together other food producers in the area. So we're looking for partners in that kind of work. We've got good background work done and ready in terms of surveying land and buildings, costs, etc. But it's really hard to manage between farming activities and building that kind of project out. So that's where we're at.
Yeah, that's very exciting. So
Yeah, thanks.
help that. As far as Urban Roots goes, monetary donations are obviously very helpful. And yeah, as well, come to our volunteer sessions while we're running our markets. We have volunteer drop-in periods from Wednesdays 4 until sundown, Sundays 10 to 1. Those are kind of over for the season. The markets are finished on the farm. But next year in the spring, please come out. And we also have larger kind of scheduled volunteer sessions at kind of spikes in our labor needs. So keep an eye out for those on social media. But yeah, I think we're running low on time, and there's Crispin.
Okay, quickly, OFA has a buy local campaign and a homegrown campaign. You can see it on social media, where we are encouraging people to look at where your food comes from and buy local, buy from the neighboring farms. Some of the federations of agriculture, like the Middlesex Federation and the Lambton Federation, have either maps or sites on their website that will tell you who's got what available, whether it's during the season or year-round. So, for example, beef farmers would be there year-round, where you could access beef. Sheep farmers, same thing. So there are availabilities in terms of where to find local produce. The other thing is the onus is on all of us, and I'm very conscious of this now with all the tariff stuff going on. I look to see where the food is grown before I buy it in the grocery store. And it takes my wife and I twice as long to shop because I'm looking at all the codes and checking it out with my phone. Because I'm going to buy Ontario, Canada, and then whether it's Mexico or European or whatever after. Quite honestly, I do my utmost to avoid U.S. food because of the political situation. So that's a political statement, and I realize that doesn't really have a lot to do with what we're talking about. But it is important in one sense because you want to know where the food comes from. And if you don't do the research right at the grocery store level, you won't be able to tell where it comes from. You're just assuming it's Canadian or European or South American. So watch where it comes from. That's the biggest thing. I mean, I go to the grocery store, for example. Sleeger's Greens have little pots that you can buy. We get those because we like the spices that they have and they're fresh. So things like that you can do that will help local farmers.
So I think we're at time. So there were more questions that were submitted on the QR code. If you have a burning question, you can come talk to our panelists on one of the breaks. We also have our food for thought table that we're collecting various thoughts. There's notepads on the table. You can write it out there. Yeah, that's it for our first panel. Please give a round of applause.